The Valdres Covenant stretched across the Kepler sector like a cancer, its crimson hulls gleaming against the void as Admiral HFY surveyed his prize. 47 worlds had fallen to his fleets in the past solar cycle, their populations either enslaved or converted to biomass for the Covenant's war machine. Now, only one pathetic blue marble remained defiant. Admiral, his tactical officer Veltar chittered, mandibles clicking with amusement. The humans are broadcasting again. HFY's 6 eyes focused on the holographic display. The message was simple, transmitted on all frequencies: withdraw from our system or face the consequences. The bridge erupted in laughter. Covenant officers, reptilian Esikitheri, insectoid Velkani and the gelatinous Morgul, all found the ultimatum hilarious. Earth's fleet consisted of barely 200 vessels, primitive fusion-powered craft that couldn't even achieve proper faster-than-light travel. Against the Covenant's 12,000 ships, each equipped with matter disruptors and quantum shields, it was like watching insects threaten a starship. Consequences, HFY repeated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the command deck. What consequences could these primates possibly? His words died as something massive emerged from Earth's shadow. The ship was ancient, impossibly so. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, meteor impacts, and the corrosive touch of deep space. Patches of different metals had been welded over breaches, creating a patchwork of repairs that spoke of desperate maintenance over centuries. The vessel stretched nearly 8 kilometers from bow to stern, its design crude and angular, lacking the elegant curves of modern Covenant architecture. Scanning the vessel, Veltar announced, his tone shifting from amusement to confusion. Admiral, this is strange. The ship appears to be over 400 years old, predating their first contact with galactic civilization. Its power signature is unusual. HFY leaned forward, his predatory instincts awakening. Unusual how? The readings are inconsistent. Parts of the ship register as completely inert, while others show energy signatures I've never seen before. And Admiral? Veltar paused, his compound eyes reflecting uncertainty. The hull composition includes materials that shouldn't exist. Metals that our databases don't recognize. The ancient ship moved with surprising grace for something so massive, taking position between Earth and the Covenant fleet. Its communications array crackled to life, and a new voice cut through the static, gravelly, tired, but carrying an authority that made the bridge fall silent. I am Captain Ezekiel Voss of the Earth vessel Remembrance. This is your final warning. Leave our system or we will make you leave. HFY's laughter was like grinding metal. Captain Voss, I am Admiral HFY of the Valdres Covenant. I have conquered 47 worlds. I command 12,000 ships. You command 1. A single, ancient derelict that should have been scrapped centuries ago. What makes you think you can stand against us? The response came without hesitation. Because we remember what you've forgotten. And what's that? That humans don't just build ships to explore the stars. We build them to wage war among them. HFY's amusement faded. There was something in that voice, a cold certainty that made his scales ripple with unease. You're outnumbered 12,000 to 1. We've faced worse odds. Impossible. No single ship could. Admiral, Veltar interrupted, his voice tight with alarm. The human vessel is powering up. But the energy signature, it's not fusion. It's not antimatter. It's something else entirely. The remembrance began to glow, but not with the clean blue-white of fusion or the violent purple of antimatter. Instead, a deep red light pulsed along channels carved into its hull, channels that hadn't been visible before, as if they were emerging from the metal itself. The light grew brighter, and with it came a sound that vibrated through the vacuum of space itself, a low harmonic thrum that seemed to resonate in the bones of every being on every ship. Tactical analysis, HFY demanded. I don't understand what I'm seeing, Veltar stammered. The ship's mass is increasing. Exponentially. And the energy readings, they're off the scale. Admiral, this is impossible. The power requirements alone should have torn that ship apart. HFY felt fear creep up his spine for the first time in decades. What kind of weapon system requires that much power? Captain Voss's voice came through the comm one final time, and now there was something else in it, something that made the temperature on the bridge seem to drop several degrees. The kind that ends wars. The Remembrance completed its power-up sequence, and the red glow along its hull reached a crescendo that made the stars themselves seem dim. Admiral HFY watched in growing unease as his tactical displays showed readings that defied everything he knew about physics. Sir, Veltar chittered nervously, Recommend we maintain safe distance. The energy buildup is... Fire a warning shot, HFY interrupted. Show them what Covenant weapons can do. The destroyer Sekthari's vengeance responded instantly, its matter disruptor lance reaching across the void to strike the ancient human ship. The beam, capable of reducing a mountain to component atoms, struck the Remembrance amidships. And simply stopped. The crimson energy surrounding the human vessel absorbed the attack completely, the beam dissipating like mist. No explosion, no hull breach, no visible damage at all. The Remembrance hung in space, untouched, its deep red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Impossible, HFY breathed. Nothing can absorb a disruptor beam. Nothing. Captain Voss's voice crackled through the comm, tinged with something that might have been sadness. We tried to warn you. Humans learned long ago that the universe is a hostile place. We've spent 4 centuries preparing for this moment. Preparing for what? To defend our home. No matter the cost. The Remembrance moved, and its movement was wrong. Ships didn't accelerate that fast without inertial dampeners, and certainly not vessels that size. But the ancient human ship shot forward like a missile, closing the distance to the Covenant's forward line in seconds. All ships open fire. HFY roared. The space around the Remembrance erupted in violence. Hundreds of disruptor beams, plasma torpedoes, and quantum missiles converged on the human vessel. The barrage was enough to sterilize a planet, to crack a moon in half. The Remembrance flew through it all without slowing. The red energy field around the ship didn't just absorb the weapons, it seemed to feed on them. Each impact made the glow brighter, the harmonic thrum deeper. And as the human ship passed through the storm of fire, something extraordinary happened. The absorbed energy began to change. Where the Remembrance had been struck, the red glow shifted to white-hot intensity. The ship's hull began to transform, the ancient metal flowing like liquid, reconfiguring itself. Weapon ports that had been sealed for centuries cracked open, revealing mechanisms that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Captain Voss, HFY transmitted, his voice strained. What have you done to your ship? We haven't done anything to it, came the reply. We've done something to ourselves. The first of the Covenant ships to fall was the cruiser Morgul's Wrath. The Remembrance passed within 50 kilometers of it, and suddenly the cruiser's hull began to change. Metal flowed like water, bulkheads collapsed, and the ship's crew found themselves breathing vacuum as their vessel simply came apart at the molecular level. Defensive formations. HFY commanded. Maintain distance. Do not let it get close. But the Remembrance wasn't pursuing them. Instead, it had stopped in the middle of the Covenant formation and was waiting. Sir, Veltar reported, his voice tight with terror, our ships near the human vessel are reporting system failures. Not damage, actual failures. Their hulls are degrading, their weapons are ceasing to function, their life support is failing. HFY watched in horror as 12 of his vessels, destroyers, cruisers, even a dreadnought, began to fall apart. Not from weapons fire but from something far worse. The very matter they were made of was losing cohesion, returning to base elements, leaving their crews to die in the vacuum of space. Molecular disintegration field, HFY whispered. They've weaponized entropy itself. Captain Voss's voice came through the comm one more time, and now the sadness was unmistakable. 400 years ago we found something in the outer system. Something old. Something that taught us that the universe has rules we never understood. We learned to bend those rules to make them serve us. But the cost. The transmission broke off, replaced by a new voice, younger, strained. Admiral HFY, this is Commander Lyra Voss, acting captain of the Remembrance. My father can't talk anymore. The process is irreversible. We've been connected to this ship for 4 centuries, and every time we use it, we lose more of ourselves. But we won't let you destroy our world. Connected how? Integrated. Mersh. The ship doesn't just have a crew, it is the crew. We're part of it now, all of us. The 1,000 souls who volunteered to become something more than human so that humanity could survive. HFY felt his blood run cold. You're saying you're no longer human? We're what humans become when they have to choose between extinction and evolution. An admiral? You've just made us choose evolution. The Remembrance began to glow brighter, its red aura expanding outward like a growing sphere of destruction. Any Covenant ship caught in its path simply ceased to exist, their matter unraveling at the quantum level. And at the center of it all, the ship that had once been human continued its terrible work. The Covenant fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane, their formations breaking apart as commanders desperately tried to escape the expanding field of molecular destruction. Admiral HFY watched 37 of his ships dissolve into component atoms, their crew's final screams echoing across the comm channels before cutting to silence. "Fall back to minimum safe distance," he commanded, but even as the words left his throat, he realized they had no idea what that distance might be. The Remembrance hung motionless at the center of the carnage, its red aura pulsing like a malevolent star. The ancient human ship had grown during the battle, its hull expanding and reshaping itself as it absorbed the matter from the destroyed Covenant vessels. What had once been crude, angular armor now flowed with organic curves, and weapon ports had emerged along its length like predatory eyes. "Admiral," Veltar reported, his voice hollow with shock, "our quantum scanners are detecting something impossible. The human vessel isn't just absorbing matter, it's converting it, incorporating it into its own structure. It's learning from our technology." HFY's 6 eyes fixed on the tactical display. The readings were beyond comprehension. The Remembrance was somehow analyzing the molecular structure of everything it destroyed, adapting and improving with each kill. It was evolution in real time, witnessed on a scale that violated every law of physics he knew. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human vessel." Commander Lyra Voss's voice crackled through the comm, but it was different now, distorted, harmonizing with itself as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "Admiral HFY, you have one final chance. Withdraw your forces from this system. Leave and never return." "Commander," HFY replied, struggling to keep his voice steady, "what you're doing is abomination. You've turned yourselves into weapons, sacrificed your humanity for power. Is this really what your species has become?" The response came from 1,000 voices speaking as one, the sound reverberating through the bridge like a death knell. "We became what we had to become. When the galaxy showed us that peaceful species die, we chose to survive. When you brought war to our doorstep, we chose to end it. Permanently. You're talking about genocide. We're talking about defense. You've conquered 47 worlds, Admiral. Enslaved billions. Converted entire populations to biomass. You call us monsters, but you've been the monster all along. We're just the cure." HFY felt rage surge through him, drowning out the fear. "You want to see what real monsters can do? Fleet, execute Protocol Omega. Crack the planet." The order sent a chill through the bridge. Protocol Omega was the Covenant's ultimate weapon, a concentrated bombardment designed to split a world's crust and render it uninhabitable. It had been used only 3 times in the Covenant's history, each time to make an example of a species that had resisted too long. "Admiral," Veltar protested, "the humans have families, children. Billions of innocents." "Innocents?" HFY's voice was venomous. "Look at what their innocents have created. That ship is an affront to nature itself. If we don't end this here, that technology will spread. They'll turn every human world into a weapon, every human into a living instrument of war. We end this now or we face extinction." The Covenant's remaining dreadnoughts began to move, their planet-killer weapons charging with ominous purple light. But before they could fire, the Remembrance spoke again. "We know what you're planning, Admiral. We can taste your intentions in the quantum foam. You want to destroy our world? Let us show you what happens when you threaten what we love." The ancient ship began to change again, its hull splitting open to reveal something that shouldn't exist. A weapon that looked like it had been grown from nightmares and forged in the heart of a dying star. The device emerged from the ship's core, a crystalline structure that bent light around it and made reality itself seem to waver. "Temporal displacement cannon," Lyra Voss explained, her voice now completely inhuman. "We learned to twist time itself, to reach back through the years and pull forward the moment of our enemy's death. Admiral, you've already lost this battle. You just don't know it yet." The weapon fired. The beam that lanced out from the Remembrance was invisible to conventional sensors, but its effects were immediate and horrifying. The Covenant dreadnought Esikathary's glory simply aged. In the span of seconds, its hull corroded, its crew withered to dust, its power core decayed to inert metal. The massive warship became a derelict, 400 years of entropy compressed into a single moment. "Impossible," HFY breathed. "Time is immutable. You can't." "Can't what?" The voices from the Remembrance now carried notes of alien harmonics, sounds that hurt to hear. "Can't bend the rules of reality? Can't sacrifice everything to protect what matters? Admiral, you've spent so long conquering that you've forgotten what it means to truly fight. To fight not for territory or resources, but for survival itself." 3 more dreadnoughts fell to the temporal weapon, their crews aging to dust in their command chairs. The Covenant's most powerful vessels, ships that had cracked worlds and enslaved systems, were reduced to floating tombs in moments. All ships, emergency jump. HFY commanded. Retreat to minimum safe distance. But as the Covenant fleet began to activate their faster-than-light drives, they discovered something that made their blood freeze. The Remembrance was somehow jamming their jump drives, preventing them from fleeing. The ancient human ship had trapped them in the system, and now it was moving again, accelerating toward the clustered Covenant vessels with predatory intent. "Admiral," Veltar whispered, "we can't escape. It's not letting us leave." HFY stared at the tactical display, watching the red dot that represented humanity's ultimate weapon bearing down on them. For the first time in his military career, he faced an enemy that was not just superior, but utterly alien in its capabilities. "Then we make our stand here," he said grimly. "All ships, full combat formation. If we're going to die, we die fighting." But even as he gave the order, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was already over. Admiral HFY's remaining fleet arranged itself in a desperate sphere formation, 8,000 ships creating interlocking fields of fire around the approaching Remembrance. But as the ancient human vessel drew closer, the Covenant commanders began to realize the horrifying truth. Their enemy wasn't just immune to their weapons, it was learning from them. "Sir," Veltar reported, his voice cracking with strain, "the human ship is adapting. Each time our disruptor beams hit it, the energy signature changes. It's developing countermeasures in real time." The Remembrance had grown again, its hull now twice its original size, incorporating the mass of the destroyed Covenant ships. What had once been a crude, angular vessel was now something organic and predatory, its surface rippling with veins of red energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. Weapon ports had emerged along its length, not the clean, mechanical systems of conventional warfare, but something that looked grown rather than built. "All ships," HFY commanded, "concentrate fire on the bridge section. Even if it's integrated with the crew, they still need a command center." The barrage that followed was beyond anything ever witnessed in galactic warfare. 8,000 ships firing simultaneously, their combined output enough to vaporize an asteroid field. The space around the Remembrance became a storm of purple energy, plasma bursts, and quantum explosions. The human ship absorbed every shot. But something was different this time. As the Covenant weapons struck the Remembrance, the ship's hull began to mirror their technology. Sections of the vessel reconfigured themselves, taking on the appearance of Covenant armor plating. The red energy field flickered, and for a moment, the ship's defenses wavered. "They're overloading," HFY realized. "The absorption has limits. All ships sustain fire. Don't give them time to adapt." The Covenant fleet poured everything into their attack, their weapons creating a continuous stream of destruction that would have reduced a small moon to vapor. For 30 seconds, the Remembrance shuddered under the assault, its hull showing signs of actual damage. Then it fired back. The weapons that emerged from the Remembrance were unlike anything the Covenant had ever faced. Instead of energy beams or missiles, the ship launched what appeared to be seeds, small, crystalline objects that moved with intelligent purpose. They struck Covenant vessels and simply burrowed in. The cruiser Velkani's might was the first to fall. The crystalline seed penetrated its hull and began to grow, spreading through the ship's structure like a malignant cancer. The vessel's metal began to change, becoming something organic, something alive. The crew's screams echoed across the comm channels as their ship transformed around them, the bulkheads becoming walls of living flesh, the corridors becoming arteries. "What in the name of the void is happening?" HFY demanded. Lyra Voss's voice answered, but it was no longer recognizably human. The words came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken by the vacuum of space itself. "You wanted to see our true nature, Admiral? We are no longer bound by the limitations of biology. We are evolution incarnate. We are what happens when a species refuses to die." The infection spread. Ship after ship fell to the crystalline seeds, their crews transformed into something neither organic nor mechanical but somehow both. The converted vessels turned their weapons on their former allies, their hulls pulsing with the same red energy that suffused the Remembrance. "Sir," Veltar whispered, "they're building a fleet. Using our own ships against us." HFY watched in horror as a third of his remaining forces turned against him. The converted ships moved with unnatural coordination, their attacks perfectly synchronized. But worse than the tactical disadvantage was the psychological impact. The Covenant forces could hear their former comrades' voices over the comm channels, pleading for death, begging for the nightmare to end. "All units, implement purge protocol," HFY ordered. Any ship showing signs of infection, destroy it immediately. No exceptions. The Covenant fleet turned their weapons on their own converted vessels, but the infected ships were no longer vulnerable to conventional attacks. They had inherited the Remembrance's ability to absorb and redirect energy, turning the Purge Protocol into a feeding frenzy. Admiral, came a transmission from the battleship Morgul's Hammer. The infection is spreading through our formation. The seeds are somehow transmitting through our comm systems. Every ship they touch, every signal they intercept, becomes a vector for conversion. HFY felt the walls of his command closing in. The humans hadn't just created a weapon, they had created a plague. A contagion that spread through technology itself, turning the Covenant's own sophistication against them. Shut down all non-essential systems, he ordered. Minimal communication, no data sharing between vessels. Fight as individual units. But it was too late. The Remembrance had moved to the center of the Covenant formation, and now its influence was spreading through the quantum foam itself. Ships began to change even without direct contact, their hulls rippling as alien technology rewrote their fundamental structure. The human vessel is broadcasting something, Veltar reported. Not electromagnetic radiation, but something deeper. Quantum information. It's rewriting the basic laws of physics in local space. The bridge of HFY's flagship began to change. The metal walls started to flow like liquid, and the control panels grew organic components that pulsed with their own internal light. The Admiral watched in revulsion as his ship began to transform around him. "Sir," Veltar said, but his voice was different now, harmonizing with itself, echoing within human overtones. "The integration is beautiful. We can see everything, understand everything. The connections between all things, the patterns that bind the universe together. Why do we fight it?" HFY drew his sidearm and fired, but the plasma bolt passed harmlessly through his tactical officer's changing form. Veltar was becoming something else, something that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names. "Because we are Covenant," HFY snarled. "We do not surrender. We do not yield. We die as we lived, as conquerors." But even as he spoke the words, he could feel the change beginning in his own body. The Remembrance was calling to him, offering knowledge, power, transcendence. All he had to do was stop fighting and let the transformation take him. Instead, he activated the self-destruct sequence on his flagship. The explosion tore through the bridge, but instead of destroying the ship, it simply fed the transformation. The plasma fire was absorbed, converted, and redirected into the ongoing metamorphosis of the vessel and its crew. HFY's last coherent thought was a prayer to gods he no longer believed in. Then he became something else entirely. The transformation of Admiral HFY marked the tipping point. His flagship, the massive dreadnought Covenant's Wrath, rippled and changed, its hull flowing like liquid metal as it joined the growing fleet of converted vessels. But the remaining Covenant forces, seeing their supreme commander fall, made a desperate decision that would define the final phase of the battle. Captain ZYX-3 of the heavy cruiser SEK Theres Vengeance took command of the scattered resistance. "All ships, this is Captain ZYX-3 assuming fleet command. Admiral HFY is lost. We implement final protocol, scorched void tactics. If we cannot win, we ensure nothing survives." The final protocol was the Covenant's ultimate contingency, a battle doctrine that prioritized total destruction over tactical victory. Ships would ram enemies, overload their reactors, and sacrifice themselves to inflict maximum damage. It was a strategy born of desperation, but it was all they had left. The space around Earth became a hellscape of cosmic violence. Covenant vessels, their hulls already showing signs of infection, drove themselves into the growing fleet of converted ships. The collisions were spectacular and horrifying, million-ton warships meeting at significant fractions of light speed, their impacts creating temporary stars that burned for seconds before fading. The destroyer Velkani's Razor was the first to successfully ram a converted vessel, its captain setting the reactor to overload at the moment of impact. The explosion vaporized both ships, creating an expanding sphere of plasma that consumed everything within a 100-kilometer radius. For a moment it seemed like conventional tactics might still work. Then the Remembrance demonstrated why the Covenant had been doomed from the beginning. The ancient human ship moved through the debris field of the destroyed vessels, and the scattered atoms began to coalesce around it. The ship was somehow reconstructing both vessels from their component particles, but the rebuilt ships were different. Improved, optimized, turned into something that blended the best of both technologies. "It's learning from our sacrifice," Captain ZYX-3 transmitted to the remaining fleet. "Every ship we lose, every tactic we use, it studies and adapts. But we can't stop. If even one of us escapes, we can warn the Greater Covenant. The battle entered its most brutal phase. Covenant ships threw themselves against the converted fleet in waves, their crews knowing they faced not just death but absorption into something alien. The heavy cruiser Morgul's Spite managed to destroy 3 converted vessels before succumbing to the crystalline seeds. The battleship SCK-Theres Fury held out for 17 minutes against a swarm of infected fighters, its point defense systems creating a wall of plasma that turned the void into a festival of destruction. But for every victory, the Covenant paid a terrible price. The Remembrance and its growing fleet seemed to learn from each encounter, adapting their tactics and incorporating new technologies. Ships that had been infected began to show modifications that shouldn't have been possible. Covenant weapons merged with human innovation, creating hybrid systems that violated the laws of physics. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Nexvara from the bridge of the SCK-Theres Vengeance, "our remaining forces are down to 47 ships. The infected fleet now numbers over 200 vessels, and they're still growing." Captain ZYXThra watched the tactical display with grim determination. The red dots representing infected ships outnumbered his forces 5-1, and each engagement saw that ratio worsen. But there was something else, a pattern in the chaos that gave him hope. "The human ship," he said suddenly. "It's not just controlling the infected vessels. It's directly connected to them. Look at the energy patterns, they're all synchronized, all drawing power from the same source." "You're suggesting the Remembrance is the central node?" "I'm suggesting it's the brain, and the infected ships are just extensions of its will. If we can get close enough to the Remembrance itself, if we can damage it directly." ZYXThra's voice trailed off as he realized what he was proposing. "A direct assault on the most dangerous ship in the galaxy," Nexvara said. "With 47 ships against 200. Sir, that's suicide." "No," ZYXThra replied. "That's duty. Signal all remaining ships. We make our final run. Every ship that can still fight, every crew that still draws breath, we throw everything at the Remembrance. If we die as Covenant." The final assault began with a coordinated attack from all sides. The remaining Covenant ships, their hulls scarred and their crews exhausted, launched themselves at the Remembrance in a desperate gambit. They came from every direction, above, below, port, starboard, their weapons blazing with the fury of a dying fleet. The Remembrance met them with weapons that defied comprehension. Beams of twisted space-time that aged ships to dust. Crystalline projectiles that converted matter into energy and back again. Clouds of nanoscale machines that stripped hulls down to their component atoms and rebuilt them as part of the growing fleet. The light cruiser Velkhani's Sting managed to get within 10 kilometers of the Remembrance before succumbing to a weapon that simply erased it from existence. The heavy destroyer Morgul's Wrath lasted long enough to fire a full salvo at the ancient ship's hull, but the shots were absorbed and converted into more crystal seeds. One by one the Covenant ships fell. Their crews fought with the desperation of the damned, knowing that death was preferable to conversion, but the outcome was inevitable. The Remembrance was not just a ship, it was a force of nature, a living expression of humanity's refusal to accept extinction. Captain ZYXThra watched his fleet die around him, but he did not despair. His ship, the SCK-Theres Vengeance, was still intact, still fighting. And he had one card left to play. "Nexvara," he said calmly, "activate the quantum singularity warhead." His tactical officer's eyes widened. "Sir, at this range we'll be caught in the blast. The singularity will consume us along with everything else in a 100,000-kilometer radius." "Then we take them with us," ZYXThra replied. "It's what we were born to do." The warhead armed with a sound like reality tearing. The quantum singularity warhead armed with a low harmonic thrum that seemed to vibrate through the hull of the SCK-Theres Vengeance. Captain ZYXThra felt the artificial gravity fluctuate as the weapon's containment field struggled to hold the microscopic black hole at the device's core. In 30 seconds, the warhead would detonate, creating a gravitational anomaly that would consume everything within 100,000 kilometers, including the Remembrance. "Sir," Nexvara reported, his voice tight with strain, "the human ship is changing course. It's moving away from us." ZYXThra watched the tactical display as the ancient vessel began to retreat, its converted fleet forming a protective barrier around it. For the first time since the battle began, the Remembrance was running. The revelation sent a surge of savage joy through the Covenant captains' hearts. "It's afraid," he breathed. "The monster is actually afraid." But his triumph was short-lived. The Remembrance stopped its retreat at precisely 100,000 kilometers and began to do something that made ZYXThra's blood freeze. The ship was opening, not like a vessel deploying weapons but like a flower blooming, revealing something at its core that hurt to look at directly. "What is that?" Nexvara whispered. The thing at the center of the remembrance was not mechanical, not organic, but something in between. It pulsed with its own internal light, a deep red radiance that seemed to bend space around it. And from this core, tendrils of energy began to extend outward, reaching toward the SCK-Thery's vengeance with predatory intent. "It's not running," ZYXThra realized with growing horror. "It's preparing to feed." The energy tendrils struck the Covenant ship's hull, and immediately the quantum singularity warhead began to destabilize. But not in the way they expected. Instead of detonating, the microscopic black hole was being drawn out of its containment field, pulled toward the remembrance like metal to a magnet. "The singularity is moving," Nexvara reported. "It's leaving the warhead. The containment field is collapsing, but the black hole itself is." His words were cut off as the remembrance simply swallowed the quantum singularity hole. The ancient ship's hull rippled as it absorbed the gravitational anomaly, and for a moment, its red glow dimmed. Then it flared brighter than ever before, and the ship began to grow again. "It ate our last weapon," ZYXThra said in disbelief. "It consumed a black hole." The voice that answered came from everywhere and nowhere, spoken by the void itself. It was no longer Lyra Voss, no longer recognizably human at all. It was the remembrance itself, the collective consciousness of 1,000 souls who had chosen transcendence over extinction. "We are beyond your physics now, Captain. We are what happens when a species learns to survive at any cost. You brought war to our doorstep, and we became war incarnate." The SCK-Thery's vengeance shuddered as the conversion began. Crystalline seeds materialized within the ship's hull, not launched from outside but simply manifesting from the quantum foam itself. The bridge crew watched in horror as their workstations began to change, metal flowing like liquid, organic components growing from inorganic surfaces. "All hands," ZYXThra transmitted ship-wide, "prepare for boarding action. The enemy is inside us." But there were no borders to fight. The conversion was happening at the molecular level, the ship's own structure turning against its crew. Corridors became arteries, bulkheads became organs, and the crew found themselves fighting not invaders but their own ship as it transformed around them. ZYXThra drew his plasma rifle and fired at the nearest bulkhead, but the energy was simply absorbed, feeding the transformation. The metal where he'd struck began to pulse with veins of red light, and he could swear he heard something like a heartbeat echoing through the hull. "Sir," Nexvara called out, his voice distorted as the bridge's atmosphere began to change, "look at the tactical display." ZYXThra turned to see something that made his remaining hope die. The remembrance was no longer alone. Ships were emerging from Earth's shadow, not the primitive vessels they detected earlier, but something far more terrifying. These were human ships that had undergone the same transformation as the remembrance, ancient vessels awakened from long slumber. The fleet that rose to meet them was vast. Hundreds of ships, each one scarred by centuries of battle, each one pulsing with the same malevolent red energy. They moved with perfect coordination, a fleet that was really a single organism distributed across space. "How many ships do they have?" ZYXThra demanded. The answer came from the remembrance itself, its voice now echoing from the very walls of his bridge. "Every ship we've ever built. Every vessel that's ever died in battle. We remember them all and we bring them back. Death is not the end for humanity, Captain. It's just another beginning." ZYXThra felt the deck plates beneath his feet begin to pulse like living tissue. His crew was screaming as the transformation took hold, their bodies merging with the ship's structure, their consciousness becoming part of something larger and more terrible than anything the galaxy had ever seen. But in that moment of absolute despair, something unexpected happened. The remembrance paused, its voice shifting to something almost uncertain. "Wait, there's something else coming." Through the chaos of battle, through the screams of his dying crew and the horrible sound of metal becoming flesh, ZYXThra heard it, a new signal from the edge of the system. His tactical displays, now more organic than electronic, showed the impossible signature of a massive fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel. But these weren't Covenant ships. The energy signatures were completely unknown, and they were moving with a purpose that suggested they'd been watching the battle from afar, waiting for exactly this moment to intervene. "Who dares?" the remembrance demanded, its voice cracking with something that might have been fear. The answer came from the lead ship of the new fleet, transmitted on all frequencies in perfect galactic standard. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are not the only ones who remember remembrance. Stand down immediately or face the consequences. ZXTHRA felt a moment of confusion that penetrated even the horror of his ongoing transformation. More humans? But that's impossible. Earth was isolated. The voice from the newcomer fleet was cold, professional, and utterly without mercy. Earth was never isolated. It was quarantined. The Remembrance and her crew were exiled 400 years ago for crimes against humanity itself. They were sent to the edge of the system to die, not to guard it. The red glow surrounding the Remembrance flickered, and for the first time, the ancient ship's voice carried notes of something like panic. Marcus, you don't understand. The Covenant. We understand perfectly, Admiral Chin interrupted. You've violated the terms of your exile. You've used forbidden technology. And worst of all, you've revealed humanity's true capabilities to hostile aliens. The quarantine is over. It's time for you to face justice. The new human fleet opened fire, but their weapons were unlike anything either the Covenant or the Remembrance had ever encountered. Beams of pure white light lanced across space, and wherever they struck the infected vessels, the ships simply stopped. The red glow faded, the organic transformations reversed, and the converted Covenant crews found themselves gasping for air on the bridges of their own ships once again. ZXTHRA felt the change begin in his own vessel. The pulsing walls returned to normal metal, the organic growths withered and died, and his crew's screams of horror became gasps of relief. Whatever technology the Colonial Defense Force was using, it was systematically undoing the Remembrance's influence. Purification protocols, Admiral Chen's voice explained with clinical detachment. We developed them specifically to counter the Remembrance's corruption. Did you really think we'd send our worst criminals into exile without preparing for the day they might return? The Remembrance itself was changing, its hull contracting as the Colonial Defense Force's weapons stripped away the accumulated mass of centuries. The ancient ship was shrinking, reverting to something closer to its original configuration, and its voice was becoming more human with each passing second. Please, Lyra Voss's voice came through the comm, recognizably human for the first time in hours. We were protecting Earth. We were defending our home. You were a plague, Admiral Chin replied. A cancer that we cut out of humanity's body 4 centuries ago. Your exile was supposed to be permanent. The purification process continued for 3 hours, the Colonial Defense Force methodically cleansing every infected vessel in the system. Captain ZYXTHRA stood on the restored bridge of the SEK Theres Vengeance, watching as his crew gradually returned to normal. The organic growths had withered away, the pulsing walls had returned to familiar metal, and the screaming had finally stopped. But the psychological scars would last forever. Admiral Chin, ZYXTHRA transmitted to the lead human vessel. I must know. What was that thing? The Remembrance, what were they? The response came from a figure on the main screen, a human male, elderly but still sharp-eyed, wearing a uniform that spoke of authority earned through countless battles. They were what happens when good intentions meet infinite power, Captain. 400 years ago, a group of human scientists and military personnel volunteered for an experimental project. They believed that the only way to protect humanity was to transcend humanity itself. ZYXTHRA studied the human commander, noting the barely controlled anger in his expression. And you opposed them? We exiled them, Admiral Chin replied. The technology they developed, the ability to merge consciousness with machinery, to manipulate matter at the quantum level, to treat the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolutes, it was too dangerous. We gave them a choice, abandon their research or leave Earth forever. They chose exile, but they took their ship and their technology with them. On the tactical display, ZYXTHRA could see the Remembrance drifting powerless, its hull now a pale shadow of its former terrifying glory. The ship that had seemed like a god of war was revealed to be exactly what it had always been, an ancient vessel crewed by the desperate and the damned. What will happen to them now? He asked. Admiral Chen's expression hardened. They broke the terms of their exile. They revealed humanity's capabilities to hostile aliens. They endangered not just Earth but every human world in the galaxy. The sentence is death. Wait, ZYXTHRA found himself saying, surprising even himself. They saved their world. Whatever else they are, they defended their home against overwhelming odds. They turned themselves into weapons of mass destruction, Chin replied coldly. They sacrificed their humanity for power. That's not heroism, Captain. That's monstrous. But before the execution could be carried out, another voice cut through the communication channel. It was Lyra Voss, speaking from the bridge of the Remembrance, her voice weak but still defiant. Admiral Chin, we know what we became. We know what we sacrificed. But we also know what we prevented. The Covenant has conquered 47 worlds. They would have made Earth the 48th. Our children, our families, our entire species, they would all be dead or enslaved. We chose damnation to prevent extinction. You chose corruption, Chin shot back. You turned yourselves into the very thing we've spent centuries trying to avoid becoming, a species that wins through pure brutality. And yet, ZYXTHRA interjected, they did win. Against impossible odds, with a single ship against 12,000, they achieved victory. Perhaps there's something to be learned here. Admiral Chin turned to study the Covenant captain with new interest. You're defending the beings who almost converted your entire crew into components of a living ship? I'm recognizing effective tactics, ZYXTHRA replied. The Covenant has conquered 47 worlds because we believed ourselves invincible. These humans, the crew of the Remembrance, they showed us that there are always greater predators in the galaxy. Maybe it's time the Covenant learned humility. For a long moment the channel was silent. Then Admiral Chin spoke again, his voice thoughtful. Captain, are you proposing an alliance? I'm proposing survival, ZYXTHRA answered. The Covenant Empire stretches across 1,000 systems. But there are other empires out there, other threats that make our little war seem like a playground squabble. What if, instead of destroying each other, we learned from each other? Commander Lyra Voss's voice crackled through the comm, filled with desperate hope. The technology exists, Admiral Chin. We could share it, control it, use it responsibly. Imagine fleets that could defend against any threat, that could protect not just human space but all civilized space. The cost, Chin began. The cost is always too high, Voss interrupted, until you're facing extinction. We paid the price so others wouldn't have to. But maybe with your help we can find a better way. Admiral Chin was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. The Colonial Defense Force will take custody of the Remembrance and her crew. They will be relocated to a secure facility where their technology can be studied and their knowledge preserved. But they will never again be allowed to use their abilities without strict oversight. And the Covenant? ZYXTHRA asked. We'll withdraw from human space immediately, Chin replied. In return, we will share certain defensive technologies, not the weapons you witnessed today but countermeasures that will help protect your worlds from other threats. Consider it the beginning of a very cautious alliance. ZYXTHRA felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Agreed. The Covenant fleet will begin withdrawal immediately. As the negotiations continued, the Remembrance drifted silently through the debris field of the battle. The ancient ship was powerless now, its crew isolated and contained, but it had accomplished something remarkable. In a single engagement, it had ended a war that could have consumed both species and created the foundation for something better. Captain Lyra Voss stood on the bridge of her vessel, looking out at the stars that had been her home for 4 centuries. She and her crew had paid the ultimate price for their world's freedom, they had sacrificed their humanity itself. But as she watched the Covenant fleet beginning its withdrawal and the Colonial Defense Force ships moving to escort them home, she realized that perhaps the price had been worth paying. Humanity had survived. And sometimes that was the only victory that mattered. The Earth turned slowly in its orbit, blue and peaceful, unmarked by the titanic battle that had raged in its defense. On its surface, families went about their daily lives, unaware that they had come within hours of extinction. Children played in parks, lovers walked beneath alien stars, and humanity continued its ancient dance between creation and destruction. And in the depths of space, the Remembrance began its final journey, not to glory or triumph, but to whatever redemption might await those who had chosen damnation to save what they loved. In the end, that was what being human truly meant. The willingness to sacrifice everything, even your own humanity, to protect what matters most. The aliens had laughed at Earth's ancient ship, but they had learned the truth too late. Humanity didn't just build ships to explore the stars. They built them to make sure the stars would always have humans to explore them.